don't have any investment in Last of Us 2.
I gotcha.
Yeah. Alrighty, well, hello, everybody. This is writing tutoring / brainstorming session with Agent Yokai Zero, and we're just going to be talking about his book, and he just gets to ask me questions, and I give him his thoughts. Give him my thoughts. So, you've been working on this story for a little bit now. Tell me like a little bit about it, how you came up with this idea, what inspired you to write it, and why you're passionate about it.
Well, at the moment, I just have the prologue, and I got started on it, as I've mentioned, when Literature Devil had a writing workshop series that he was doing. And the idea was I just kind of wanted to follow the rules and break a little bit of them. And I was able to come up with a bit of an introduction to Wizard Slayer, and he's basically meant to be my take. It's my first genuine take on the archetype that a lot of heroes have, characters like Batman or the Punisher, for example, and that they have the tortured detective mechanic, but internally he's a little more specific in that he has to sort of decide whether what he's going after is revenge or benevolence and safety of the people that are still around to be saved. And the women in his life, because it's going to be a harem, so I don't mean harem in the silly sense, I actually mean it in a serious sense, and that the women in his life are kind of the ones that build him up, so to speak. The protagonist is meant to be a bit of he's meant to be a fallen paragon, sort of a paragon that lost their way. And the story is essentially meant to, I'm planning for it to be about the help of others, allowing for him to, because it's quite clear that he's incredibly competent on his own, but the help of others is hopefully going to be what allows for him to reclaim his heroic identity as opposed to his nihilistic self that he is now.
Mm-hmm.
What I've been working on is a bit of the world building. I have a low resolution idea for how I want the villains to be, but more specifically, I've been trying to work out the mechanic of precisely how it is that the call to action results in Wizard Slayer obtaining the practical tool that he needs to stand a chance against the enemy. Because the enemy, it's essentially the sorcerers versus the wizards, and Wizard Slayer doesn't have any powers, so he's pretty much just a human. What allows him to continue forward is that he has the competence, but he also has a lot of tools at his disposal. He's a bit of a minimalist in that way. And the way that it works is the wizards are the all-powerful enemy, where there's just more and more of them, kind of like Goblin Slayer. Whereas the main character, he's a bit on his own, but he has a school campus. Hey everyone.
Hello.
Hopefully you guys can help us out. We're just talking about Wizard Slayer. It's nothing you guys don't know yet. But
Okay.
so where was I? So essentially,
Minimalist.
yeah, he's a bit of a minimalist. The wizards have sort of all this all-knowing power on their side, and he's just trying to mitigate that. So his goal isn't necessarily to become stronger. His goal is to just eliminate their power so that people can live without being tortured, essentially. And the idea here is the mechanic I was able to come up with is while you have I'm referring to, at least for now, I'm referring to the enemy stronghold as the House of Lords, which is based on what the kingdom was based on in Macbeth. And so the House of Lords, their goal is essentially to obtain the Seal of Kronos. And much akin to the name, it's designed to maintain the status quo. That's how it works as a plot device. And what the Seal of Kronos does is it's sort of like this symbol. It's this red symbol that the antagonist achieves somehow. And what it does is it allows for him to be all powerful. It allows for him to manipulate others, at least in a limited capacity. And most specifically, it allows for him to summon more henchmen into existence, which sort of explains why the overrunning of wizards becomes so prominent. And for the protagonist, I think that on the other hand, he ends up obtaining the seal of Kairos, which is what allows for him to break the status quo, so to speak. And it isn't that it makes him all powerful, it actually does quite the opposite. All it really does is allow for him to combat the negative energy of the wizards. So it doesn't make him stronger, it just makes his competence more mechanically useful in the face of the all-powerful wizard that is the antagonist. And I spoke with an old friend of mine on how I might be able to mechanically have these seals operate, and he suggested that there be a messenger of some kind. So I was thinking that there would be a dragon that holds each seal, and that only certain people are able to speak to this dragon, and well, these two dragons really. And I'm thinking it would be a third dragon that's much smaller and more vulnerable. I was thinking of making him a bit of a snarky smartass, kind of like Spyro. But what I wanted to do was have him be sort of almost like a mascot type character, but he's most specifically a plot device that's used to communicate with the dragons. And I was thinking that at first he would be held at the House of Lords by the antagonist, which is how they're able to obtain the Seal of Chronos. After that occurs, I was thinking that he breaks out somehow, and I think I know exactly how I would do that. And when he breaks out, he is able to assist Wizard Slayer in obtaining the opposite seal, the complementary one, the Seal of Kairos, so that he gets what's necessary to be able to stand a chance. And what I wanted to specifically do with that is have Shaman, the character that wasn't necessarily revealed much in the prologue. I was thinking of actually having her be a bit of a double agent, where she's working for the wizards, which is why she doesn't talk much. But she has a hard time betraying them because she's been a double agent for so long that they're kind of her friends now. So she on one hand, I wanted it to be more literal in that magic is emotionally based in this world, so she's not able to hurt her friends. On the other hand, I also like the idea of her eventually picking up a tool of some kind and not being able to use it because she just emotionally she can't do it. And I was thinking she would be the one that betrays the wizards and breaks out this messenger character, so to speak. And when I thought of it that way, it became very clear as to how I would put it all together. So now I just need to get more specific and into the hierarchies of the wizardry so that I can move forward.
Okay. So, in terms of the story, how best can I help you with this particular story? What would you like from us in terms of assistance?
Well, I think that the first thing we might want to talk about. So, as I've read the prologue, you're already pretty familiar with how things function at Source Campus, right? You have a very specific party of characters that are useful to Wizard Slayer in their own ways. Now, the complementary, which would be the antagonists, so far I have a couple of characters. I would like for the main character, the main antagonist, he's referred to as Blood Feud because he's essentially a human persona that basically personifies that. That's what he is. Mm-hmm. And I kind of want like his Alfred, so to speak, to be a character known as War Cleric. And the way that War Cleric functions is that he's going to be sort of like his first officer, and the rest of the characters are just going to be a bunch of henchmen that are referred to as wizards. So I haven't decided how I want the hierarchy to work, and it's a little low resolution, but I'm considering keeping it that way and just having it focus on just a couple of characters. So instead of having like an army of 7 specific characters that counteracts with wizard slayers, I'd rather just have a couple of specific ones, at least so far. And yeah, so what I'm thinking of doing, and you can give me your input, is essentially there are only going to be 3 main characters that are antagonists, one of which is an anti-hero, and that being Shaman. So specifically 2 antagonists. I'm thinking of having it be Blood Feud and War Cleric. And War Cleric is sort of like the one that speaks with him to keep him encouraged. But he's also the one that's more methodical. So you could think sort of like almost like the Spock to Blood Feud's Kirk.
Okay.
Now, because of the lack of specificity in the world building, I was hoping you could help me with that. Obviously, I could describe Source Campus a little bit more in my flashback sequences, which I do intend to do eventually. So when I'm editing, I can go back to the prologue, describe the campus a little bit more. But for now, I'd like to focus on the antagonists, which means I would likely be describing the House of Lords and how it functions. And I think that Dunn in particular, I suspect he might have some experience with that, describing an enemy stronghold and how it mechanically functions as a hierarchy.
Okay.
If I want to just have 2 or 3 characters that are specifically mentioned in that hierarchy, then how can I still build it so that you feel like you're in a stronghold of enemy forces, even though only 2 or 3 of the characters are the ones that I want to focus on?
It'll really depend on, like, I think a lot of it with like making the audience feel like they're in an enemy stronghold is describing the atmosphere. And describing like maybe some of the bad things that might happen. Like, for example,
Cold, oppressive would probably be a few good words to use.
Yeah, very maybe like a sterile, sterile set of sterile metal and rock.
Spartan, there's not much there.
Mm-hmm.
Here, I actually have. Let me see if I still have this with me. Yeah, here we go. So here's a bit of it's just a demo for the kind of opener I'm going for. I don't think this is final in any way. It's just a little draft that I wrote just to kill time in a few minutes. But this is sort of how I want Chapter 1 to begin. Something like this. The rain poured relentlessly upon his shoulders, carrying with it vibrations of thunder. The castle resided only a short distance ahead. Had he not the discipline, he'd have turned back now. However, the cries of obligation echoed loudly. He would answer them. Approaching the gate with a sturdy step, he greeted the guard behind its steel with a salute. You shouldn't have returned, the guard said. He remained silent. As the gate opened, he marched upon the path's wet soil, the marsh terrain ceasing to modify his posture. Each pair of guards along the way stood aside to let him pass until he reached the stone steps. With a deep breath, he ascended them, greeted at the top by the silence of 2 faceless men. He spoke. 31st Legion of Arms. War Cleric. The castle doors opened. Now, so that was obviously, it was decidedly brief, and here's the thing. One thing that I'm wondering about, so obviously the next step, if I was to go with that just as an example, would be to start describing the innards of the castle. But here's the thing. I'm noticing I'm having a hard time with the nouns. So it's been established that the enemies are wizards, but here I'm referring to them as guards. So it's like, how can I make it clear to the reader that these are wizards that are in a specific military role of this castle without it seeming difficult to understand?
You could just say wizard guards.
You could also make it obvious by what equipment they use, what they're wearing.
Yeah.
Or maybe I can give them a proper noun. So, for example, like just off the top of my head, like if you were to refer to them as people that were in the Wizard Legion, they're referred to as mithrils. So then I can say mithril guards, for example, something like that.
Yeah,
Give them some kind of a proper noun.
That sounds like it would certainly work.
Mm-hmm.
So done. With what I just read to you, assuming I went with that just as an example, if you had that in front of you, what would you do with it? If you were the one that wrote it, where would you go from there? Would you start describing the inside of the castle? Would you go back and further emphasize the guards? What would you do? What would be your call to action?
Okay, so in terms of what I would likely do with that would be I would, well, one thing that I would kind of change is basically the man kind of as he walks up, he just kind of takes in everything about the guard and lets the reader know what they are,
Okay.
based on like context clues, almost like how Sherlock Holmes
So you want me
would.
to? So this is a bit like I'm. It's more reflective of my issue with the prologue of how I wasn't describing things as well as I probably could have. And here it's like, especially since we were speaking about that idea that I had from you about, well, it was like an idea I got from your input in that for Wizard Slayer keep it brief, but for the enemy more context, like describing the small things because of how grounded he is.
Hmm.
So
Yes.
you would go back, you would describe the guards more, you would describe the castle's exterior more, and then that would almost serve as a warm up for you to move on to the inner part of the castle.
Yes. And you can use it either as a contrast or complement. The interior is either complementary or contrasting with the exterior, depending on what you want to go
Ooh,
for.
okay. Okay.
Yeah, and if you're going to use a castle, you need to decide what kind of castle you're using. So
And it
perhaps.
and
Hmm?
oh, I was just going to say, so is the castle in the middle of a city, or kind of like the Palace of Justice in Hunchback of Notre Dame or the Bastille, or is it outside the countryside?
Well, I feel like it's a bit of both, kind of like Dracula's castle in Castlevania, where it's right in the middle of a city, but it's a city that's not in the middle of its region. So it's like you know how when you start up Castlevania, there's like fire everywhere, you're traveling through the fire, and then at the end of the fire is the castle that started the fire. That's kind of the idea. I want it to be like the more in ruins the town is, the closer you are to the castle.
Okay. So one thing that kind of works is that there are usually, depending on the era, back in the day, what they would do with a castle would usually be there's a castle on like a hill or of some type,
Yes.
and then there is the town surrounding it. And as time went on, kind of the castle slowly spread out, and the walls kind of also the castle were built up to surround the town and make the town in from just a town to a city with a wall around it and a keep in the center.
Maybe if I want, I could actually start describing this character. And again, it might not even be War Cleric, it might be Blood Feud, but I kind of like the idea of. So, okay, let me back up a bit because I'm having two conversations at the same time. Let me pick something to
Yeah.
talk about. So, okay, the first thing I want to talk about is the subject of the conversation. So it looks like I started this describing War Cleric, even though he's not the main villain, at least not at this point in the story. And what I'm characterizing is essentially the title, because the title is meant to be complementary to the prologue, An Eye for an Eye, the law of retaliation. And I want War Cleric to be more of the law in the retaliation, whereas Blood Feud is more of the charisma.
Mm.
And what I want to do is I want to have the same way that, well, it's actually somewhat of the opposite. So, you know how in the opening of the prologue, it was Lancer speaking to Wizard Slayer right off the bat. Here, I like the idea of it being not, it's not from Blood Feud, it's not Blood Feud staring out a window and War Cleric talking to him like it was with Wizard Slayer and Lancer. I actually kind of want something with a bit more build up. So I like the idea of it being from War Cleric's perspective, but I want it to have some build up to it. It's funny when you think about it, the prologue, the first sentence of the prologue, technically it was from Lancer's perspective, but the revealing of the character was simply so brief that it was basically Wizard Slayer's point of view. Whereas here, it's going to have so much build up that it's clear. It's like, oh, this is War Cleric going to whatever the subject matter is. And then the subject matter will turn out to be he's meeting with the main antagonist. And so it's sort of complementary or a bit of a juxtaposition in that way in comparison to the prologue. And What I'm thinking is backing up a bit. Maybe instead of him already being on the path to the castle, because of what we're talking about now, actually have War Cleric be, maybe he's walking from an area in the city to the castle, and I can describe that the city looks more ruined as he gets closer to the castle.
So if I can kind of like back up, so essentially, Blood Feud is the Iron Fist versus War Cleric is the Silver Tongue. Is that what you're going for?
Actually, I kind of want War Cleric to be his most competent soldier. It's not that he's
Okay.
this. So it's more like Blood Feud is the Silver Tongue, and
Oh,
War
okay.
Cleric is the Iron Fist. It's kind of like a king and the king's best knight. So it's actually exactly what you just said, just the other way around.
Oh, okay. I see.
And I want War Cleric to be troubled by his honor. So this is what I mean by that. So well, I kind of want both characters, both Blood Feud and War Cleric, to be essentially equally troubled. Blood Feud is going to be troubled in that he has too much honor, and that's what leads to Shaman being able to easily betray him because he holds too much faith in his followers. And but at the same time, I don't want to make him look stupid when it happens. I want to make it clear that he's actually quite competent. So that's going to be difficult to have that not seem contrived, but one step at a time, I guess. I'll cross that bridge when I get to it. With War Cleric, I want him to be troubled by his honor and that he's actually a bit more order driven. He's a bit more ruthless, but it's only because he deems it necessary. So kind of like Wizard Slayer, but he's the order to Wizard Slayer's chaos.
He's a utilitarian.
Yeah, it's almost, I guess now that I think about it, now that it's getting more self-actualized, now that I'm talking about it with you, I guess you could say, so essentially, Wizard Slayer, when he's at his best, he's the chaotic hero. So maybe with these two villains, War Cleric is the law to combat Wizard Slayer's chaos, while Blood Feud is the evil to combat with his good.
So Javert versus Jean Valjean, is that a good analogy?
To be honest, I'm not familiar with who you're referring to.
I'm not familiar with those names either.
Oh, have you
It's Les Mis.
Here's the protagonist and antagonist of Les Miserables?
I haven't read it, sorry.
You haven't even
No.
this. What do they teach in schools these days?
Holy crap! I knew something and everybody else didn't.
How to be as ostracized as possible if you're not radical left wing.
And how to be cancel culture.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess so. So basically, Javert is a very law-oriented man who believes there is nothing beyond above the law, and that you have to suffer the consequences of the law, no matter the circumstances. And Jean Valjean is a thief who reforms his life and then becomes a mayor, and then Javert, who's been hunting him for a while because he broke his parole, and vanished, decides to go on the hunt for him, and he's constantly dashing after him. And then at the end of the play, spoilers for a like 40-year-old play, a nearly 200-year-old book, Jean Valjean saves Javert's life and lets him go, and Javert is so broken by that he kills himself because he cannot like handle the cognitive dissonance.
He cannot reconcile what happened.
Yes. But he believes that the law, because of his background, because his dad was a criminal and his mother was a whore, that the law is the most important thing in anything, and that order must be maintained, and that justice must be meted out no matter what.
Mm-mm. Yeah, I can see that.
Is that kind of what you're thinking about going for with this particular guy?
Yeah, more specifically, I like the idea of there being two villains that complement one another because they're a team. But then, for one reason or another, there ends up being only one, and he has to fulfill both roles. So that would result in a lot of character development.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that sounds like a good plan.
You really think so?
Yeah, I think that works fine. I think usually it will depend on which you want to die in the end.
I already know that.
Okay. Well, I imagine you do. I'm just saying that it will depend on.
Oh no, I'm just saying. I'm saying good news. I already know that. To be honest,
Okay,
I'm surprised I already know that.
Oh, good.
No, I'm not being contrived. Do you think I know what I'm doing?
Hello, semantic dragon. I stole that from Count Olaf. Hello. I am your beloved Lord Commander Dunn.
Since we're only about 20-30 minutes in, I think I'll mention this now. I think that, so you know how you ended up helping Neph for like 4 hours, but this is going to be a brief one?
Yeah.
So bear with me here. Well done, bear with me here.
Yeah, go for it.
I think because I have such a lack of material, it might be helpful to me if this was about an hour, but then we had a few more that were each an hour in the future with some time between them.
I think that would be great.
Yeah.
I think that would be great. I just remember after streaming for that long and having my brain be constantly working for 4 hours, I was just dead.
So it sounds like it sounds like it would be very it sounds like it would be very mutually useful to us if we kept it brief, but there was a higher quantity of them.
Yeah, where we can kind of like
Neph, from what I understand, she had like this 80-page fucking forum. I don't have that. I have my one precious prologue. I have my one precious prologue, and then I'm dead in the corner. I'm gonna need you guys' help.
That was just the one thread that I've decided that I want to share.
I know, but holy shit!
A few of my other threads are over 200 pages long.
Yeah, I've I only have like one fan fiction thing that's like really, really long. It's like 88K words.
Mm-hmm.
And me and a friend are working on another one, but it's infrequent. I'm trying to work on my other stuff. I'm really close to finishing manuscript number 4. And I'm hoping to get another book published sometime in the middle of next month, in the middle of the month. Yeah, so Becoming Better actually had a really good thought.
Yeah.
It sounds like he's defining the protagonist by that which he is not, and the two antagonists against which he compares are towards each side of an ideological spectrum. It isn't necessarily that the antagonists, I think you might be onto something though. It isn't necessarily that the antagonists are on opposite sides of an ideological spectrum. It's more so that their methods vary. They have very different methods. One will do anything necessary. Much like Wizard Slayer, War Cleric will do whatever is necessary to follow orders. Whereas Blood Feud, he is more on he has the more honorable approach. He's the very he's the one, he won't do everything that's necessary because he's not willing to sacrifice his honor. And that's when it's like it becomes less obvious as to what specifically makes them different in a mechanical standpoint. So I'm going to have to find a way to discover. So, okay, you know how with Kirk and Spock, it's like Kirk is he's kind of decent at everything, whereas Spock is really good at being an intellect, but specifically that. So it's like sometimes they'll clash, but very rarely will they clash. That's kind of what I'm going for. I think that's a useful comparison because I don't want them to necessarily be disagreeing every 5 seconds. I want them to actually very rarely disagree, but when they do, it's for a very specific reason, which is why I think that it'll be good if we talk about this more and more with like each of these more specific things with all of these characters and archetypes more and more over time. Because of the lack of content, it's difficult for me to determine what those specific things will be until the situation has been written. Deontology versus consequentialism.
I don't think I know what either of those are.
I don't know either. Let me look them up real quick.
Well,
Okay.
deontology is a theory that suggests actions are good or bad according to a clear set of rules. Okay. And then consequentialism, I imagine that's more like the ends justify the means.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I guess, yeah, maybe that is the right way of putting it, especially since, depending on how the story is written, it'll be idiosyncratic in that it depends on how specific the situation is as to whether they'll clash or not and how heavily they'll clash. I do know that in the end there will only be one. So for the way I want their let's see. Well, the next thing that I think we should tackle is, well, let's say that I guess we'll just go forward linearly. So let's say I have the town described being ruined and War Cleric reflecting on that or ceasing to reflect on it as he proceeds towards the castle's exterior, describing the soldiers as well as the mentioned exterior, and then heading into the castle's interior, which will either further exemplify or juxtapose the state of the exterior. And then what would you recommend I do next? Would that be, once I'm done with the interior, it just gets more and more heavy until the revealing of the revelation of the villain?
Okay. So you said that he shouldn't have returned. So I think that one thing about that is to kind of give us some internal dialogue, maybe kind of like hinting at what we're about to see. And kind of like what might be some of the reasons.
That's the thing is I liked the sound of "you shouldn't have returned." I just don't know if it's useful to the story. I was just doing this this was just a discovery summary. But let's say I do take that path. You shouldn't have returned. So maybe you can give me an idea as to what that should mean.
So
the idea I was going for at first, again, this was just discovery running. It was incredibly low resolution. But what I was going for was, you know how you always, like, I'm going to give you a perfect example of this. You know how in The Lord of the Rings, you have the orcs fail at their mission, they show up, they say their mission failed and it wasn't their fault, and then they get killed, right? I've always wondered what it would be like if just one of those characters that are in that kind of situation, because that's a very common trope. The villain shows up and then you kill the messenger for his failures. I want a messenger that takes responsibility for its failure, even if it's not his fault. That's what I want War Cleric to be. I kind of want, maybe War Cleric maybe he's the messenger. Maybe War Cleric is the messenger for the warehouse that was just taken down by Wizard Slayer in the prologue. Maybe they can be talking about that specific mission. And especially since it's called the Law of Retaliation, maybe this can quite literally be the retaliation of that specific prologue. So this would be like an accurate representation of how they respond to those types of contrivances.
Mm-hmm.
Do you mean like, should I bring this up? Probably not. But do you mean like, in Empire Strikes Back?
Say that again because you cut out on me.
Nida from Empire.
Who?
What about Empire Strikes Back?
Okay, when they are in the
Oh, Captain
asteroid
Nida.
field, yes, Captain Nida.
Yeah.
Who goes to report it because he's
duty.
the captain. It's his duty to do so. Yes.
Yeah,
And the
he's held
consequence
the
of that is Vader kills him.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's. Here's what I was thinking here. It just now occurred to me. This could be a great way to showcase both War Cleric's sense of law and honor, sense of his objective sense of orientation. And it'll be an even better way of showcasing blood feuds, because I'm about to reveal blood feud. This could be a great way to showcase his sense of honor. Because he'll say, you know what? You've taken responsibility for the taking of the warehouse. I won't kill you. Maybe I should do that. Would you agree that's what I should do? Because I think that's what I should do, but you're more practiced than I am.
Yeah. I think that a big thing is... Yeah, I think a big part of it is kind of, if you're having a line like that, it's actually a good source of tension. And one thing about it is when you have like a story, you want to have like ups and downs of tension. And just to keep the audience engaged. And if he's like coming back after like a failure of some type and he's hungry to advance himself, that's a good source of tension.
And it is a good call to action. It's also a good call to action for the hero, anyway. I mean, the villain, I'm sorry. And another thing that I could do is, because, remember, Wizard Slayer, he thought there were going to be 7 because there were reported to be 7 wizards in the prologue, and then there ended up being 14 when he came back. So that was why he was so fucked up. And but so maybe this was the 15th, and he was the one that was responsible for them. So it makes you wonder, where was he? So then maybe I can get into where he was. Maybe he was looking for the seal. Who knows? Again, it's still there's a severe lack of material at the moment. So I think those are questions that are best left unanswered at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
So
it could always just be like he's as in a military venture and he somehow like screwed up. Either like circumstances conspired against him or he miscalculated something and now he's learning from said mistake.
Yeah. And like I want it to be very clear that like, here's one thing. Here's actually a specific question I have. I almost lost it. So the guard said you shouldn't have returned, which means that him returning by himself alone is enough for the guards to figure out just what happened. So maybe he's known for being followed by other soldiers.
Mm-hmm.
So he always has maybe 1 or 2 other people with him?
Maybe, but since he's coming back alone, that makes it maybe that's why they know. Somehow or another, they already know what happened. Mm-hmm. And maybe it's because it could be for a number of reasons. It could be because it's unlike him to come back alone. And then I get to decide how obvious I want to make that. So the same way that the rusted knife didn't necessarily mean it was a long time since Wizard Slayer's last mission, unless you read into it. Maybe this could be the same thing, where I don't spoon feed the reader by saying, oh, normally he has the Mario Brothers walking with him. It's like, no, I don't want to contrive that. Instead, just show it, and then if the reader chooses to, they can read into it. So he says you shouldn't have returned, meaning that the guard knows. Maybe just that specific guard figured him out because he is the gatekeeper. He's the one that's always at the gate watching him walk in. It would make sense for the gatekeeper. I might even exemplify the fact that he's the gatekeeper by giving him a different name. Instead of just saying the guard, refer to him as the gatekeeper. It doesn't even have to be a proper noun, just as he's already being differentiated from the rest of the guards in that he's the keeper at the gate.
Well, I actually just thought of a way. I don't know, like, this is subtle to me, but I don't know if, at least, like, to my mind.
I enjoy subtlety.
Well, basically, what happens is he walks through the gate, and maybe the gatekeeper has like a second guard on duty who doesn't know this guy, and he just whispered, "Where is
Exposition.
Yeah, he just asks. The guard just asks, like, you don't even need the gatekeeper to answer. You just have the second guard ask the question, "Where's his entourage?"
Yeah.
And you just cut from there. Don't say anything.
Oh, okay, that's good. I actually like that a lot. Yeah.
Where that way you aren't you don't shove exposition down their throat. Like you say, oh, because this and this and this. You just like slip that in. Like, oh, it's unusual that this kind of high-ranking official does not have an entourage or honor guard, and you can do it in a subtle way like that.
I'm typing that in.
And you don't even need to have the guy answer. You can have that be answered when he's inside of the castle or the main office, or however you want that to be.
Yeah.
Where he explains to his higher up what happened.
Yeah. Okay, hold on. So, ruined town, describe the surroundings. Castle exterior, where's his entourage? Describe the soldiers, describe the exterior. Castle interior further exemplifies or juxtaposes the exterior. Revelation of blood feud, who spares him? Just makes me think of that one game, Darkest Dungeon. In time you will know my failings. Or whatever it is that he says. So, now we have him anxious to improve. We have him anxious to prove himself because he's lost an entire team. Now, I get to decide how personal I want that team to be to him. I think it would be better if perhaps this team wasn't particularly close to him. He just saw them as numbers. But maybe he's assigned a new team where it's not just numbers, and it's going to be shown to the reader that he's changing and becoming a little bit more... I guess in that way he becomes more nuanced in his methods. Maybe I'm asking this question too early.
You can do a couple things. One could be, since usually soldiers will fight together in a similar team, it could be that he was just kind of assigned to another post where a team...
Yeah, okay, yeah, and maybe he wasn't there until after they were dead.
Mm-hmm.
So now here's the thing, and maybe that can be a consequence, so bear with me here. So it would make sense for the team to have been slaughtered before War Cleric showed up, because you remember in the prologue when Enchantress told Wizard Slayer it's not an urgent mission, but he decided to take it as an urgent mission anyway because of his personality. It would make sense, but do I want to make that clear or leave it open for it to be read into? Like, do I want to go ahead and make it clear to the reader that the cause and effect relationship is Wizard Slayer's obsession in taking it as an urgent mission caused them to be killed before War Cleric got there? Or should I just leave it alone and not even talk about it, or not worry about it in any way?
So basically Wizard Slayer surprised them?
Well, remember in the prologue, I didn't necessarily make it clear. I could go back and make it clear, or I could not.
It will very much depend on what you feel like it, since usually if it's a payoff that happens later, you want to make it like somewhat vague and allow the reader to read into it.
So it sounds like that's something I should edit later if I write the payoff in the future.
Yeah.
Yes.
Put a little asterisk and say, this is a payoff, now go do the lineup.
And if it's something for short term, I think the reader would be fine with you kind of spelling it out a little bit. If it's like some, I think they would be fine that a reader, because especially like if like you have something like happen and then a reaction, usually it's good to kind of give the audience some measure of like, oh, this is why there's the cause and this is the reason for the cause and effect.
And if I really want to get into it, since Wizard Slayer barely made it, I can, if I want to, either through exposition or what have you, I can make it clear that if you and I can basically figure it out. He was almost dead. If War Cleric was there, Wizard Slayer would have died in the prologue. Mm-hmm. So it's like, that means that if this cause and effect relationship is if I end up writing in this cause and effect relationship, then that means that Wizard Slayer made the right decision in his obsession. Now I get to decide whether I want to spell that out or not. Depends on how important it is. So if there's a payoff later, go back and add that in. If not, then don't worry about it, is what you're saying.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Because the nice thing is, if you have something that's subtle, but it's consistent throughout the story, then a payoff happens that's really satisfying. But if something happens and then you don't have a whole lot of context for it, and then there's a payoff only a little bit later, it can come off as, it might be slightly jarring for the reader, where they don't fully know like what's going on.
Yeah.
It also adds readability, because the first time they read it, they might not pick up on it.
Yeah.
Like, for example, there's a thing in, I believe it's the Lycanius trilogy, where a lot of overlapping timeline thing where people just jump back and forth in time, where suddenly you realize what exactly happened, allows you to figure out, oh wow, so this is the reason for all of this. And when you read back through it, it makes things much more complex. And
you know what else it does? It also makes Wizard Slayer's methods seem a bit more nuanced, and this is what I mean by that. So, on one hand, so maybe you didn't catch this because a lot of people don't. So, on one hand, when Enchantress said it's not an urgent mission, so take your time, and then Wizard Slayer lied to Lancer later and said an urgent mission came up, I have to go. So on one hand, it makes it seem antisocial, but if I write in this cause and effect, that makes it clear that he's antisocial because it's necessary. Every mission is urgent in his eyes. And if he didn't have those eyes, he would be dead.
He runs himself ragged.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do. You're right on the money with that. Mm-hmm. And then I get to sort of get into that later, and then... Yeah, so if I might do that, then yeah. So with the castle interior, go ahead. I was just about to summarize.
Oh, okay. I was just going to say that, I actually did something similar with Valkar Perion in Lost Legion, where he has succeeded for most of his life, and his successes don't really mean much because they're so frequent. However, the few times that he's failed in his life, he saw that each of them had terrible consequences, and so he pushes himself to always succeed.
Okay.
Because he is deathly afraid of losing, because he's seen that his failures can have terrible consequences, and he is scared of failure.
Yeah, part of that is even the way Wizard Slayer treats people. So, do you remember when Priestess was attempting to console him and tell him, no, you're not doing it out of vengeance, I know you're a better person than that, but then as he was getting her worked up, he got up and said, I should go. I wasn't saying that in just that he wanted to end the argument. It was actually more specific than that. I just didn't want to spell it out because it's more of how I see him. The reason he got up and said, I should go, wasn't just because he wanted to end the conversation. It was specifically because he could see that the conversation was causing her distress. So he was realizing, this girl is attempting to console me, and therefore I am hurting her. I should go. But all he says out loud is, I should go. But that's his thought process, I'm thinking. Whether it's conscious or not. That's kind of where I want to go. Things like that. This is helping me with that. In summary, we have castle interior where, we have everything before the castle interior, and then the way the interior functions is it'll either further exemplify or juxtapose the exterior. Then there's going to be the relation of blood feud, who spares him for his supposed failings, And later on, there's going to be a possible payoff where Wizard Slayer's obsession was the result of his success in the prologue. And I could also use that as an opportunity to make the warehouse a more iconic location. So I could maybe go back and describe it a bit more. Maybe it becomes a more specific post. Kind of like the crime alley in Batman, where it's like, it's not anywhere special, it's just a crime alley. But because of what happened there, that's what makes it specific. Now, this is obviously not that level, because it's not like this was the birth of Wizard Slayer or anything. This was just the first mission that made everything so clear. And so let's see what we're taking back from this. So with the revelation of Blood Feud, that does something that's good for Blood Feud as well as for War Cleric. It reveals both of the way it reveals their arcs quite clearly, depending on how I do it. We're also going to have the revealing of the hierarchy around them, and the revealing of the destruction that the hierarchy causes because of the destroying areas of the town, the decaying areas of the town, rather. So the question is, where would I go from there once I have that revelation of Blood Feud, and we have that, perhaps that call to action where he's like, no, I'm going to spare you. I need to figure out how the conversation is going to go after that, specifically what will be said. So maybe that would require some personal reflection, or maybe you can help me with it.
I was kind of wondering, like, what, like, are the consequences for his failure? Is he like given like a slap on the wrist? Is this kind of a chance to redeem himself with a slap on the wrist, or
maybe he gives him a mission that will inherently redeem him?
Mm-hmm.
Something that Overlord would do, like Einzolgaun would do from Overlord, because he would take the opportunity to have you do something that will inherently redeem you and be useful.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe he would have him, what's something that he could do that would be inherently useful and redeeming in some way? Especially since I would like for them to be old friends too. I'm thinking of them being, they've been doing stuff like this for a while together.
So are you familiar, so I imagine you're familiar with the labors of Hercules, right?
Yes.
Okay. You could do something like that.
Where he gives him a set of trials to overcome, very specific ones.
Yeah, like a specific.
But since he's his most competent soldier, aren't those things he would have had him do anyway?
Yeah.
So then there's no real consequence then, is there?
Well, it could just be that he does that, but maybe he just has him like in the stocks or something, or puts him in solitary confinement for a couple of days.
And then sends him out?
I feel like he would want to punish him in a manner that would be useful.
Mm-hmm.
So it would have to, I want the punishment to be something that would be explicitly useful. You know what I mean? Something that isn't even much of a punishment, but he's simply painting it that way.
Maybe like a couple of quick clashes. They're just like, this is like not even my favorites or above punishment.
And like removing a finger or something.
Well, that's the thing. I don't think that would be particularly useful to complete a specific task. He already knows this guy's his best soldier. I don't think he's going to do anything unnecessary or silly or over the top, not unless it was necessary. But the thing is, it's difficult to figure that out, because anything that's necessary, he would have had him do anyway, because he's his best soldier.
Well, what do they use for transportation? Do they use cars or do they use horses? Because perhaps he usually has his horse ready for him by the time he gets to the stables, but instead, Blood Feud makes him do all the work himself for the next couple of missions he makes him go on.
Well, usually like if in medieval times, like if a soldier like wasn't able to, I think that like it will kind of depend on the severity of the mistake you have him make. You will have had him make, because depending on that severity, like if it's something like he just gets there not on time and like Wizard Slayer moved before him, and I don't think that would require anything as bad. But if it's something like he manages to get he fails in some specific task,
Well, hold on.
he
I
would
like
probably
I like Champion. I like what you're saying, and I like Champion's focus on transportation because it's time oriented. Because it seems like what we're going for is it's because Wizard Slayer acted preemptively, and because of that, that was the consequence. So maybe Blood Feud expected this to happen, and it was just a test to see how loyal his best soldier was. Would he take responsibility for it? Would he walk back to the kingdom by himself and say, "This is my fault"? Maybe Blood Feud, maybe this was a somewhat contrived situation because it's been something that's been going on for so long. Maybe that's what it is. So maybe it's more of a test than a punishment.
That actually
In fact,
works
maybe
very,
he'll
very
even
well.
reveal that.
That actually works very well. Maybe even
Because since I'm having such a hard time figuring out a punishment, maybe there doesn't need to be one.
yeah, probably. Yeah. Since it seems like what he did wasn't that severe. Like, and so the thing that you can do is basically he's having trouble with, maybe there's like traitors in their midst or something that he feels
And this is
like,
also very, you know what else this is? It's also really useful to showcase Wizard Slayer's limits and weaknesses. Like, Wizard Slayer acted preemptively because he's not God. If he was there later, he would be dead. Like, I'm just assuming this is what I'm going to do. Like, in this hypothetical circumstance, if War Cleric was there, Wizard Slayer would be dead. So this is useful in that it showcases the vulnerabilities of Wizard Slayer. And what were you about to say just now?
Oh, I was just going to say that, like, perhaps, like, there are, like, he wants to make sure that his friend is somebody he can trust, because maybe he's having, like, reports that are semi unsubstantiated of traitors in their midst
Possible
scheming
mutiny
against him.
And this is
Something
also
like that.
before, you know what? I think you're absolutely right, because let's think about this from a hierarchical standpoint. This is before he has the seal, which means he doesn't have any, he hasn't been creating henchmen yet. These are people that he had to recruit. So when he gets the seal, mutiny would no longer be an issue to worry about. This is a good call to action to get the seal too. Because remember, I was referring to he would be using the seal to create more henchmen. But if he's got nothing but recruits right now, it makes sense for him to be worried about mutiny now, but not later during the climax when I'm going to be focusing on other things.
As well as, like, officer issues are possible.
Define officer issues.
Like, if he is kind of the head of this hierarchy, he's going to have underlings that want his position.
Yes, unfortunately. Or
maybe his quote unquote punishment, but really just because he passed the test. What if War Cleric's next mission is to investigate mutiny?
Yeah.
He's going to say, you know what? You've proven yourself loyal, but I still need to punish you. So for the next couple of days, you're going to be examining my mutiny issues. There's going to be an investigation for possible mutiny amongst our ranks, and you're going to be the one to do it, and you're going to do it alone.
That sounds like it will work.
Since you're so keen on being alone and that you couldn't save your comrades, maybe you'll be better at getting them killed instead.
Yes.
I like this a lot. Wow, you guys are helping me even more than I thought.
Yeah, well,
Except I'm helping you a lot less than I thought.
Oh,
You're here. You're here. That's all you need to do is be here.
You're providing emotional support, Drake. We love you. Don't worry.
Yeah, I have like 10 times as many questions as I do answers, so I'm still trying to piece this together in my head of what entirely is going on.
Me too. But you know what, Drake? I think your questions can help me find answers to my questions. So what's your
Okay.
first question?
What do the wizards want? I imagine, like when I say that, what were they attempting to achieve by gathering in that warehouse where Wizard Slayer
Genocide.
barged in and screwed them up?
So
Genocide?
yeah, they want to commit the genocide of the sorcerers, and that outpost was just one of the many that was doing that.
So were they
For what?
gathering
For
up a bunch of generals and preparing to spread out information so
Well,
that when the signal went out, then they just mass hit everything?
Well, let me answer
Like a
Dunn's question
simultaneous strike?
first. So the call to action for this genocide issue is I want it to actually be more nuanced than it's just they just want to kill each other. Well, it's actually really specific, and I may or may not get inherently into it, but it's before the time of this story. There were two factions, the sorcerers and the wizards, and slowly they ended up being at war due to disagreements throughout the towns and things like that, throughout the region rather, and most specifically to get it goes down to get as personal as possible as well as broad as possible. So to shrink it down to interpersonal conflict, the same thing that happened to Wizard Slayer happened to Blood Feud, but it was the other way around, and they were casualties of war.
So what were the disagreements about? Was it religious, economic, political?
Now we're getting into lore, which I'm not ready to do.
Okay, sorry.
I don't have the lore yet. All I have is that they're at war. I don't have the lore, though. I don't know what caused the war. And every time I try to answer that question, I get ahead of myself, and it really slows me down. So, but if you can help me with that lore in the future, once there's more material, that would be great. It's just that I don't want this. I haven't decided how lore heavy I want this story to be, you know?
Well,
because it's my first one, so how simple do I want it to be? How complex do I want it to be?
So I mean, like, just in terms of like,
we'll get right back to you, Drake. Don't worry.
Well, I was just thinking, like, it could just be as simple as like they wanted, like, both are just factions that wanted power in the government.
So maybe the House of Commons was composed of sorcerers, and the House of Lords was composed of wizards, and maybe the House of Commons was eventually eliminated during the war prior to the story. And then I can choose to mention that or not.
Yeah.
That's a good idea. So, I mean, politics will definitely spark that.
Yeah. So, like, you can even, like, it could... since usually when two factions go to war, it is usually control over either politics,
land, resources.
Yeah, it's usually something related to a very specific thing, like the right, like French Revolution. It was over the rights of the people to be taxed or not, and the fact that they had barely any say in the government, and that people kept overruling them. And that,
well, I don't know what the specific spark of the war would be. I don't know if I'm ready to answer that question.
You don't have to know it. You don't have to know it quite yet. It's totally fine. It's just something to consider.
I'd like to know in the future. I just don't think I do right now.
My suggestion is that if any of us brings up a question that you don't want to answer just yet because it deals with something you don't want to work on yet.
Well, but it's more like, should I
down.
want to know it or not? That's the thing. It's not that I'm rejecting the question. It's that I don't have the answer, but now I don't know if I should.
Okay.
Like, if I don't have it and I should, by all means, give it to me.
I think.
Here's a thought. I've been getting into Gundam 0079 lately, the first one, and basically all they really do to set up the conflict is say that the Federation and Zeon are at war. It's something about like taking over different sites, but not really important. The contrast to that is something like Seed, where they tell you initially that something called the Bloody Valentine happened, and then whatever the different forces are at war, and you're left really lost in Seed, but you're not as lost in 79 because there's enough structure there that you can fill in who the players are and what they're doing later, but you have the major structure of what's going on. And I find you really want to have at least some kind of skeletal lore in place, because I've hit this problem myself. If you don't have something like that, then when you write, especially if you discovery write, you're going to wind up contradicting yourself. So you want to at least have like some kind of primitive lore Bible, even if it's not very complex, even if you don't have proper nouns, even if you don't know who's making what moves.
Like my lore for Lost Legion is fairly detailed, but my Young Dragonlord books, all that I really have is just a couple, like one event that happened, and that event kind of branches out into the rest of the story. But as time goes on, that lore kind of becomes superseded by the previous books becoming the new lore. And it will ultimately like kind of just if something is significant to the story and the conflict, I would advise at least like having some reasons in mind and just coming up with them. You don't have to come up with them right now or have them, but it's good to kind of have some of like at least like the pivotal events in mind and what the catalysts for the various conflicts that you have within the story.
Yeah, I'm not really sure what sparked the war. I just know that it occurred.
Yeah, and that's totally fine. And you can figure that one out later. We're focusing on
it. Is something that I intend to know in the future. I just don't.
Yeah.
Do your characters know?
That's a good question. Because what we're pretty much following, they're like what's left, you know? Like I think it's more like, because with Blood Feud it's very personal because of what happened to him. But because of his honor system, I imagine he would know, especially because of his place in the hierarchy. I imagine War Cleric would know as well. I kind of want Shaman to be caught up between the two factions. And as for Wizard Slayer himself, as well as Source, I guess you could say they're sort of like what's left. It's not, well, not really, because like if we're going with the Commons route, it's like, well, the House of Commons was destroyed. That's all over now. They're all disorganized. Now it's just genocide. And that's sort of all there is to it, just sorcerers being killed. But what I want to do mainly is sort of like Source Campus, you know, the campus of, you know, the main place. That's sort of like something that was thrown together as a last-ditch effort by the people that had the resources to do it. It's somewhere for Wizard Slayer and his comrades to reside. He's not even, I mean, if you want to really get into it, he's not even really officially there. It's just something that sort of happened that I may or may not explain later. All we know is that Enchantress put it together and then they attempted to help Wizard Slayer. And, well, we know how that turned out. And to be honest, in my opinion, I think that if Priestess wasn't there to heal him during the flashback of when his family's killer got away, I think that Wizard Slayer would have succeeded at getting revenge, but he also would have died from blood loss. So I think they actually did save him, which, to be honest, is part of the reason why he resents them, because I think subconsciously he just wanted to die. Like, he wanted to get his revenge and die. But this is something that's larger than that. So that's the thing.
Do they have to convince him to see a bigger picture?
That's a good question. I'm going to type that question. That might be something I come back to. I like that. To be honest, maybe he's the one that is looking at the biggest picture and that he kind of wants to save everybody. But at the same time, he's in this mental state where he feels it's more out of revenge than anything else. Like, just like what Priestess said, I thought you did this to help people and to save people, right? And he's like, that's what I thought at first. And then, yada, yada.
So it's sort of like Superman, and he thinks he has to save everyone.
At least that was how it began. And then it just became more personal because he succumbed to the negativity that he was constantly exposed to.
Mm-hmm.
And not only that, but it's also, not only was he constantly exposed to that negativity when he was on missions attempting to save people, but then there was sort of a drought in missions. And when that occurred, that sort of gave him, I guess you could say, a bit of an identity crisis. So he just had this long-term negativity that's sort of been conditioned into him now by his situation and by his own delusions. Dispositions is a better word.
Okay.
Do you have any more questions for me, Drake?
Wanted to get back to the warehouse. Just logistically setting up what's going on. So I'm getting the wizards gathered in the warehouse, about 14 of them. Wizard Slayer heard about it, hit the warehouse. They didn't see it coming because they didn't expect Wizard Slayer to be so out of control and unpredictable. And that's why, who's the cleric? War cleric?
War cleric, yeah.
And that's why War cleric had to run out with his tail between his legs and get out of there because...
No, I'm saying that it was over before he got there. Because remember, his title is War Cleric. It's his job to keep them alive. But he also happens to be the leader.
Oh, so he didn't get there in time. But
Exactly.
was he the reason why they gathered? And it's like he gathered them, hey, everybody get together in this warehouse, I'll meet you there. And
No,
before
I
he
think
met
he
them
was
there,
just
Wizard
assigned
Slayer
at a
wrecked it?
post. No, I think he was just assigned at a post, which is part of why because if he was the one that decided where they would go, then that brings the blood feud contriving this whole thing theory out of the way. Then it no longer makes sense. How would blood feud know that War Cleric would happen to have them gather in a place that would get them all killed? Then War Cleric would really actually be responsible. I don't want War Cleric to actually be responsible. I want him to feel responsible.
So he feels very accountable for like his specific failures. Is that what you're going for?
Yes, he has extreme accountability.
So War Cleric so it was the Big Kahuna, whatever is. I'm bad at names.
I believe it was Blood Feud, right, Yokai?
Blood Feud, thank you. So
Yeah.
Blood Feud made the decision that everybody's going to gather there. And what was War Cleric's
Either he
role in that?
specifically, I don't know if he specifically made that decision or if that was just the way it was for a specific period of time. Maybe it was something that was predisposed for a while. It's what's important isn't who had them gather there, more just the fact that they were there at all.
Yeah, I know. The point is, I'm trying to figure out sort of why they gathered. They were preparing for something. I'm almost certain of it.
There are multiple outposts throughout the region. I just haven't gotten into it yet because of lack of world building. That was just one of many outposts of wizards.
And I suppose the reason Wizard Slayer hit this one is because this is the one that Enchantress found out about. And there are others scattered around and they don't know where they are.
Yeah. Now we have to get into, well, if you want to read into it, why would Blood Feud know of all outposts that was the one to worry about? That's a good question, too.
What I was thinking, did he know? He may have suspected Wizard Slayer might hit one of them just by nature of his character, but he may not have known which one necessarily. And by Wizard Slayer sort of taking the entire organization by surprise, because has Wizard Slayer hit any of these other outposts before, or has he just been like taking out the occasional
It's what
wizards?
he does.
It's
kind of, this is like a day in the life of Wizard Slayer was what the prologue was. He's done it before. He does it all the time. It's just that it's been a while.
Oh, so this was the first time he's hit an outpost in a while.
Yeah, but I didn't make that clear, which was purposeful because I didn't want to shove it down the reader's throat. It was just a small detail, more so for me, to help get in his mind. That's why his knife was dull. And that was why Enchantress thought to herself that despite Wizard Slayer being stir crazy, blah, blah, blah. Well, he's stir crazy and his knife is rusty because it's been a while. So it's just a small detail. It's not something that I intend to overbranch. I could if I want to, but what I could do maybe is I could make it a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy that one of the areas would have been overtaken, and that first of all, we know Wizard Slayer has history being near that warehouse because that was where he saved Enchantress across the street at the building that used to be her pawn shop. So he knows that he has business there already. He's been there before. And he's kind of been everywhere before, but that's an iconic location for the story, and so it makes sense for a Blood Feud to expect somewhere around there. And maybe to make it a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy that War Cleric would fail, maybe he just assigned him to that overall area instead of a specific outpost.
I'm thinking the reason that area was the one Enchantress lit up on was because she knew the area well and would know if anything changed even minutely.
But the reason her pawn shop was located there was because that was before the wizards overtook that area. That was because remember that was a flashback sequence. And yeah,
Okay.
and yeah, that also explains from you're talking about why she would be familiar, why she would know that warehouse is what you're saying?
I'm saying why she would pick why she would have been able to find that warehouse but not any of the others, and it was because she knows that area.
Yeah, she knows the area because that's where her pawn shop used to be, so it also makes sense.
Yeah, so that would be like where she starts her search, and that was the first one she just came hot up.
And maybe she just has a presupposition of searching places she's been to before. Now we're getting into the psychology of the character, which can be fun. But yeah, maybe that's kind of maybe it's a bit maybe it can be a little symbolic of her dwelling on him saving her.
Actually, where I'm thinking of all this is the counterplay of wizards do this, Wizard Slayer does this, wizards respond, Wizard Slayer responds, and it's basically just, it's like a chess game. And Wizard Slayer makes a move, and then
It's a back and forth between the two.
Yeah, it's not.
Yeah, so
yeah,
the reason
it's not
that
necessarily. Yeah, it's almost like there's not necessarily a protagonist and an antagonist. They're just both each other's antagonists.
Yeah, and the
so
scene
yeah, I would
where
describe it as a chess game.
The cleric goes to Blood Feud. He's delivering the information about what just happened, and then Blood Feud is preparing his next move. And it's a big move. It's one of the more significant moves, and it's one that's really going to start setting things in motion. And the wizard slaying that is about to commence is going to be unlike nothing ever seen before in the setting. This is the most exciting point in the history of this world that's about to go down, and this is how it gets set up.
I guess that is a helpful way of describing it. It's a reassuring way of describing the situation, certainly. Another thing is that it also would make sense for it. It's like, okay, Wizard Slayer seems to be attacking again. That's what Blood Feud is going to figure out when War Cleric tells him this. He's like, oh, okay, it was fucking Wizard Slayer, lovely. And he's going to say to himself, you know what? Maybe I could use this to my advantage. Maybe just leave the outpost out there to distract Wizard Slayer while I thin out my ranks a little bit. So you know what? You focus on eliminating the people in here that could be committing a mutiny, which I'd like to have that be more branched out a little bit. And then let Wizard Slayer take care of the outpost. I want the outpost to serve as a distraction for Wizard Slayer, which he might. I'm probably going to have him catch on to, but I'm going to have Blood Feud say, okay, yeah, do that. And then while he's distracted with that, we can thin out the ranks. And then when we're done thinning out the ranks, the next call to action would probably be, now we need to replace the ranks and get the seal.
Yeah, and the seal is where he summons more reinforcements or troops.
Yeah, especially since Blood Feud himself can probably even set out to get the seal with War Cleric maybe, or have them be separated. The point is he might not even need to be in the building anymore because it'll be down to the people that he trusts. And then the rest will be henchmen once he has the seal. So that could be useful in giving the character more mobility.
What if he was setting something up so that he could gather all of his most disobedient, disloyal henchmen into one place, and then silently slip a little information to Enchantress's camp and sort of get them attacked by Wizard Slayer. Use Wizard Slayer to kill off his enemies.
Use him as a tool. Yeah.
Yeah,
Could be
that
right.
sounds very interesting.
Well, that's kind of what he's already doing, but I'd like the idea of making it more premeditated while he's doing other things like getting the seal.
Yeah, you said that Blood Fuse is the strategic one?
He's kind of a bit of everything, but mostly he's charismatic. So they'll listen to him because he's the leader and he's a charismatic one at that. So
but is it in his character to have plans as elaborate?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Just wanted to make sure I wasn't unwriting your story out from underneath you.
Well, it's almost like, yeah, because it's almost like Blood Feud is like he's the one that sets the plans in motion, and War Cleric is the one that carries them out. Whereas Wizard Slayer's kind of out paddling his own boat, trying to play both roles by himself, which is why he needs the harem to kind of back him up so he doesn't shoot himself.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like I mentioned in the notes I sent you that I imagine that Enchantress is sort of Wizard Slayer's mission control, so she sort of serves that.
Yeah, it's a little low resolution at the moment because it needs to become more specific as the plot rolls on. It was the prologue was more just about the character's origins and Wizard Slayer's real-time behaviors. So I'll probably once I show the world building of the hierarchy for the Wizard's point of view, then chapter 2 will probably come back to Wizard Slayer's point of view and get more into world building around him. When it's from his perspective, it'll be more blurred because he's so mission oriented. But then when it's from the other character's perspective, it'll be more detailed, like it was for War Cleric here in this passage that I read you and what we're talking about now. Does that answer your question?
For now, this is also something that came up. Maybe it's just the kind of things I write, but I was unable to determine whether or not you intended the wizards to be human.
So I foreshadowed that wizards have demons in them, and that's subjective whether you want to take that literally.
So are they possessed, and there's something inside them that turns a human into a wizard?
I may or may not get further into that. It was more meant to be a figure of speech than anything when Runesmith said all wizards have demons in them, but sometimes humans have them too. He was essentially saying, like, because I mean, it makes sense that Runesmith was able to get inside of the pawn shop without getting burned because he's human. But he's saying that, humans can be evil too. But you can also take it literally that it's possible that they actually had him possessed using archaic magic, which is something I'm considering, but I may or may not build upon that further. It's, to be honest, the origins of the wizards, what they are internally, is more left to your interpretation.
Yeah, one thing that really stuck out in your story was the scroll. It's a clever workaround to how Enchantress had her shop secured, and it was also described with this I don't know the exact word you use, but some description about how old and how powerful it was. So wizards sort of have access to this sort of stuff. Is that
Yeah?
how
It utilized archaic language. It was using it's actually the Goetia isn't it is actually the name of it's the name of a grimoire. It's basically a hierarchy that served as a hierarchy of demons that was written. And that's been sort of called back to by psychologists, I think, I want to say the 1800s, but that's not the point. I made Goetia, I turned it into a language, Goetian, and that just means it's a powerful spell.
Aha. So are you pushing the motif further to suggest that the wizards are actually like possessed?
It's implied. I kind of want to leave it loosely implied. I want to leave it loosely implied. Mainly because I haven't decided whether I want to make that canon yet, but I also just like the implications of having it in there and not going further on it. I really like the implication of it, but I haven't decided whether I want to build on that implication.
Yeah. See, this is why I'm suggesting you have some kind of skeletal lore in there, because if this was, let's say this was true, let's say wizards are possessed. Maybe that's not only just like a facet of what they are, maybe that's their end goal. Maybe they want everybody to be possessed and then everybody is wizards.
Or maybe that was someone that worked in the House of Lords got access to Goetian archives, and that caused them to become possessed and therefore elicit a war. Because possession in itself, that'll do it.
Oh, that's something very amusing to say.
Wizard waifus are best waifus.
But really though, like I'm just saying, possession, that'll do it. You know, that'll cause the war, because now it's no longer about the specific political motives. Maybe they were actually maybe the sorcerers and the wizards were actually quite allied. Like maybe they were fairly societally structured, and it wasn't until the possession of one of the officials that worked at the House of Lords that they became more malevolent. Then you could say that the true antagonist would be the demons that possess them, as opposed to the wizards themselves. And then I can choose if I want to get into that.
So the wizards are something inherent and pre-existing, and something happened to change them. So the nature of what wizards are doesn't have anything to do with the war.
Which could also show Wizard Slayer's predisposition.
That sounds good, actually.
Because I want to have there be times when Wizard Slayer is infiltrating the House of Lords. I want there specifically to be two. The first time he infiltrates the House of Lords, the House of Lords, the House of Lore, the House of Lords, he succeeds at infiltrating, and I'm thinking that what'll happen is he loses an important battle there, but doesn't die. And I think it'll be because the antagonist hesitates. And during his hesitation, Wizard Slayer escapes. And that would be useful to humanize the villain a little bit. And it would also be useful to showcase Wizard Slayer's vulnerabilities. And in that moment, I'd like for the revelation mainly to be, maybe this is the first time the villain realizes that Wizard Slayer isn't that different from himself, and that's why he hesitates. And then in seeing him hesitate, if Wizard Slayer notices that he hesitated, he would say, wait a minute, maybe they're human too.
Wizard Slayer going, save Martha!
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
I think Batman vs Superman killed the whole hesitating thing.
Yeah.
So it's like I was thinking, what if it was more Blood Feud wasn't done with him yet? So was Blood Feud the one that spared him specifically? Or somebody under his command?
I'm thinking that it's going to be Blood Feud because I don't think War Cleric would do that. I think War Cleric would have finished the job.
So maybe War Cleric is more like a battle strategist, whereas Blood Feud is a war strategist, and he let Wizard Slayer live on purpose. Wizard Slayer doesn't know why, and it bugs the crap out of him.
So,
or maybe it can be left. Maybe it can be left ambiguous whether he did it for a strategical reason, or he did it for an emotional reason. Maybe I'll leave it ambiguous, or maybe Blood Feud himself won't know, and he'll be troubled by it, and he'll talk about it with War Cleric, since War Cleric is like his Alfred or his Spock, so to speak.
Or maybe he thinks to himself that it's for a strategic reason, but deep down, there's something.
That sounds like something I would do.
I have a question. So, could it be possible that kind of Wizard Slayer is being used as a political device? One example that I actually have in it's from Wheel of Time. This guy asked the question of how do you unite people? Or how do you quickly make a town like you? What you do is you loose a rabid lion in the middle of the town, and then once everybody is scared, you come in, you kill the lion, and then you put its skin on display. So, is it possible that Wizard Slayer is being used by this particular guy for this purpose?
It would make sense if he's worried about mutiny.
Mm-hmm.
But it wouldn't make sense if it occurs after he gets the seal, because then it would no longer serve that purpose.
Well, I just mean that, like, he is in something of a precarious position in terms of he doesn't, they're kind of not unified. There's a lot of infighting that's going on over whatever thing you want to have be the central of however you want, like, the dynamic to be. And maybe not even like mutiny, maybe like his peers don't like him, or he's trying to wrangle people that are just under him that are slightly recalcitrant.
Mm-hmm.
And
not only that, but if we're going to have infighting, we would need to figure out, let's say I take the possession route and let's say I commit to it and I go full force with that. Then we would need to figure out how come some of the possessed are fighting with some of the other possessed. And then maybe it isn't so much that they're possessed, but rather just that they've become malevolent from the exposal to Goetian language.
Mm-hmm.
I could just do that.
Mm-hmm.
So continue.
Yeah.
No, you can continue. I interrupted you because I wanted to clarify that.
Oh, no problem. I was just, I was pretty much done. I was just kind of wondering, like, that's usually kind of how, like, you create a boogeyman in order to get people to rally around you is usually a very...
Yeah, Wizard Slayer is the Jew.
Yeah, the Jew, the gypsy, the witch in the Salem witch trials, the rabid lion in the streets, that you say, oh, okay.
That sounds like a lovely title for a chapter. My favorite gypsy. Because, like, he's using him for his political gain and whatnot.
Yeah, or like a scapegoat of some kind.
Yeah.
And because, like, if you kind of just say, oh, okay, he's scary, I think I can actually find the passage. Well, actually, never mind. I don't. Well, actually, I can find it. It's like the prologue, and I can just read it out of the Dragon Reborn, and I'll just read it out for you.
Mm-hmm. But the thing is, with Blood Feud, he believes that he kind of has a similar predisposition to Wizard Slayer, in that he thinks he's doing the wizards a good, which I guess technically he is, by demonizing Wizard Slayer.
Okay.
So it's not like it's like, is he manipulating them? Not necessarily. Is he controlling them? Well, yeah. But go ahead and read what you were going to read. Oh, Drake, what's up?
So, what's more the cause and effect here? Is it the Goethan possession, and then the wizards started getting aggressive, and in the first wave of aggression, that's when Wizard Slayer's family dies. Wizard Slayer becomes Wizard Slayer and starts fighting back. So that's what you're going for?
Yeah, and it's even possible that Wizard Slayer himself could have been the one that killed the person or people that were close to Blood Feud that resulted in his birth, so to speak.
What do you mean resulted in his birth?
Well, when I say birth, I mean, like, his call to action. Like, that's when he took up the name of Blood Feud and became the personification of that. So it's almost like Wizard Slayer was Bloodfeud's red-haired man, or it could have just been any sorcerer that did it. I haven't really decided that yet.
Okay. So I found the passage.
Okay.
Okay. So do you know how to unite people behind you, Child Carden? The quickest way? No? Loose a lion, a rabid lion in the streets, and when panic grips the people, once it has turned their bowels to water, calmly tell them that you will deal with it. Then you kill it and order them to hang the carcass up where everyone can see. Before they have time to think, you give another order, and it will be obeyed. And if you continue to give orders, they will continue to obey, for you will be the one who saved them, and who better to lead.
Sounds kind of like Ozymandias.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like a conspiracy of Democrats voting for Trump.
Yeah, that's just what I was thinking of when kind of you were talking. That's just what brought to mind.
I could see him doing that because it would be so useful. Not because he's an inherently manipulative individual, or maybe he is. He's just so good at it that he's manipulating himself. But
Well, it could even be.
specifically, it just serves as a useful tactic.
Well, it could just be since the guy in the thing is technically not a bad guy. He's a man who's trying to get things ready to for basically an Armageddon type situation. And
Yeah.
he is like he's a religious zealot who believes that he's in the right, and he's saying this is probably the best way to try and defeat a guy who's a bad guy, who he thinks is a bad guy, even though he's this guy that he's talking about is about using as the hero of the story.
Yeah.
So what you can do is basically say, okay, so I have this problem. How do I deal with this problem and solve my other problems?
Typing something for a moment.
Alrighty. Well, we've been going for
You alright? It never ends. It never ends. You see what I'm saying? It's like a running gag. It's like a running gag here.
well,
I was in the middle of typing something. I heard you start laughing. I was like, what's he laughing? Oh, for God's sake.
Done 0. Okay, so
kind of
Preston's
diet
funny.
Okay. Okay. I am intrigued to see the Okay, next week. I haven't totally decided what we're gonna watch. Maybe we'll do another Maggie May Fish video. This one and the RoboCop one.
Oh
Oh,
no.
for God's sake.
Just make sure you don't miss this time.
Or
Yeah.
yeah, Crow watched it and Crow was like, "Why did you do this to us, son?"
Sorry, Crow, but what done wants, done does, because this is his channel.
Well, I don't have to. Maybe we could watch. I was thinking about watching something else. I was thinking of going back to technically the roots of video response and doing the Austin Film Fest audio that Dragon Demands has.
We could.
Maybe.
Since there's so many idiots online claim that you're taking him out of context. They didn't say all these dumb things. It wasn't that bad. And like, I have the audio of the worst bits, as well as the part where they put a live baby that wasn't wrapped properly on an actual block of ice that was about the size of a refrigerator.
Why?
Because plastic doesn't have the right water bubbling in it. The actual ice does.
Why do they need water bubbling?
Well, because it just doesn't look quite the same. It doesn't look as authentic.
For like a scene or something?
Yep, for one scene.
In what? Game of Thrones?
Yep.
So he needs 70 live horses, full frontal, ambiguously brown nudity, and an actual block of ice. That is a weird showrunner.
And
You want to hear a pet peeve of mine? It's off topic, but look in the corner. The people on YouTube can't see this, but over in the corner of StreamYard, tutoring session with Agent Yo. But here's the thing: they put ellipses, which means that's 3 characters. Just put Kai. It's the same amount of characters. What are you doing?
Well, interestingly enough, my family nickname is Kai because my name is Malachi.
We're the same guy. Got it.
And I am actually lit dev.
Yeah.
Hey, at least I have a bright future for my writing career.
So is there a Jekyll and Hyde situation going on there, Mr. Lit Dev? Because your voice doesn't sound very panty melting. I'm sorry to say that.
Maybe we should let Drake read.
It has a limit of characters.
Literature angel.
Literature duelist.
Yeah. But I have. So there are 3 videos.
Literature of thy sword.
Didn't that used to be yours?
Yeah. So
I was Angel of thy sword, then I was Demon of thy sword, and then I came up with something entirely new to stick with.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we'll just do that along with them being lazy and missing night shoots, not having an actual writer's room, having no qualifications, stuff like that.
Yes.
You know, the usual.
Yeah. Yeah. It's and them casually admitting from their own mouths to putting a baby on a block of real ice.
Oh, for goodness sake.
They casually admitted it on screen. There's audio of it.
Oh, yeah, that's
fantastic.
Oh God.
Yeah, this isn't like a set report or anything. This is from their own mouths that they admit this.
No, that's not what you do. You don't do that with babies.
Yeah.
That's not the only baby-related incident that happened.
Oh no, there's more?
There's specifically one more. It was
Oh no.
Since there's a little baby that's born, and it's an important plot point that it's a male baby. So on the set, the director was yelling, "All right, let's get the shot of the penis."
Oh no.
Yes, to make sure everybody knows.
You gotta be kidding me.
Oh.
Nope. Nope. There's audio evidence of it.
Why?
Why? Oh my God, Lord!
And it's even and guess what? Guess what triggered that? Guess what triggered that? It was somebody asking, "So, how did you kind of come up with the idea of the Night King?" And they just say, "Oh, you know what? Actually, it was it was kind of interesting. And we actually just kind of really like that idea and just unprompted go into this story about like what happened that day of when the first time we saw the Night King was.
Jesus.
Oh God.
And they just unprompted go into that story, including and just talking about like how the baby was on a real block of ice and that the mother was really upset.
Oh yeah, you don't do that with anyone's kid, not someone else's, and not your own.
Without great difficulty, I'm just bringing crazy things that these idiot men have said to everybody's attention.
Yeah.
So, on Tuesday, we will cover the Austin Film Fest.
Okay,
And
I'm looking
Perfect.
forward to that. Perfect.
yeah,
Literature duelist.
well, I want to thank everybody for coming on to help out with the stream. We're probably going to end now since we're hour and 45 minutes in. This is about what I would like to kind of keep it at, as under these writing tutoring sessions under, since I want to keep this as digestible as possible.
I'm sorry about that.
No, it's fine. It's okay. We were having a lot of fun and lost track of time with that one.
Yeah.
But yeah, we will conclude here. Is there anything y'all would like to pimp before we?
I'd like to pimp this comment by Mark in 3D. Literature duelist, literature angel, then literature devil is the final evolution. He can learn epic laughter and morning nonsense. Oh, fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. Thank you for that, Mark in 3D.
Yes.
I'll be sure to mark that one in 3D.
The Mary Sue is an example of bad art because the artistry of writing is not illustrated in the Mary Sue. To use an example, an excellently written female character like Leia or Ellen Ripley or Sarah Connor is an example of a Mona Lisa painting. By comparison, a Mary Sue like Rey or Captain Marvel is a stick figure written by a monkey with mental problems.
That is actually quite accurate.
It was the best of times. It was the worst of times.
Time was the worst of times, chat. And
Yep.
we're living in both of them.
Where we live in the era where the two worst movies in the DCEU are Batman related.
Yeah.
Don't remind me.
Well, if you want to do a Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice, and then Justice League show, I would be down for that.
Uh,
At least Batman won the fight. At least they got that right.
Yeah. Okay. Well, anybody on who would like in the chat who would like to join my Discord who has not done so already, please do so. And I would love to interact with you, get your suggestions, help people to get feedback for their work, have a place to advertise their content. Feel free to come aboard. If there are anyone who wants to come on the Sunday stream to read some of their writing and get some feedback on it, please let me know ahead of time, and I will make sure to put you on the list. I try to keep it to about 2 hours for that one. If you want to let me know, just go for it, and I will put you on the roster. Thank you to my guests, Agent Yokai, Drake, and Neph. It was lovely chatting with you, and hopefully this was helpful for you, Yokai.
It was more helpful for very specific reasons than I expected it to be.
Alrighty. Well, it was wonderful wonderful chatting with you all, and we will see you all later. Adios.
I look forward